Hi, it's Nathan Feinstein. I'm returning to this presentation from the last video. You might see I got cut off, my own fault, but I'll try to continue with the subject matter, which the last thing was the firstborn, the revolt of the firstborn. That word was out that the firstborn were for the last plague, and they were concerned about it. They took it seriously, and the Pharaoh was approached. And he rejected the request to let the people go and just not take a chance with the lives of the firstborn. As a result, there was a revolution because of that. So within his own camp, there was a revolution which he suppressed, and consequently, um, they lost their lives. I might have mentioned that Pharaoh was also a firstborn, so he ignored everything apparently to get his way to maintain his power. And this is not an uncommon theme that the masses, the people, the loyal subjects get sacrificed because of the whims, the desires of leadership. There is a point to make with this. I don't know how to say it was positive, but that people who give in a little, who have been doing their way for so many years, even to give in a little, puts them in a situation where maybe their whole foundation and the whole basis of respect for them would start to deteriorate with that one little crack in the wall, so to say. So I'm not defending him in any way, and I'm not saying that this is a recognized point of view. It's just some of my experiences that, and I think we see it in the world now, that people will go out of their way to hurt other people to maintain their own way. And it's the thing we can talk about at another time. That's what Pharaoh did, and Pharaoh lost his firstborn son, and Pharaoh didn't know it was going to happen to him, and therefore that's why he came and had Moses and Aaron woken up in the middle of the night and had them chase the Jewish people out of Egypt as fast as possible. It's a little bit interesting to say that what's the point of the firstborn? Why couldn't it just say one from every family? As you might remember, that in the days before the giving of the Torah, and where Aaron, Moses' brother, was appointed as the priest, and his lineage would follow after that, was a priest in Judaism. Up until that time, the firstborn were the priests, among the inheritances, had a high position in the families. So, as a result of that, one would think that there's a certain spiritual formula involved here that it had to be the firstborn to weaken Egypt even spiritually. Whatever strength they had left, but even that was taken away. Now you might notice that from yesterday I have a haircut, and everybody gets haircuts, but it coincides with the holiday season. There's a I've pointed out before, not just having a holiday is a totally joyful and how to say experience. I mean, it is, of course, but the things that go along in Judaism with um, what we do with the holidays, and actually with the Passover holidays, that the unlike some of the others, once the holidays finish, you're sort of on a clear course for a while. That we fall into a period called Sphira, which is a mourning period, among other things. So for 7 weeks after Passover, we have like light observance of mourning, if you can call it light, but we're not allowed to men aren't allowed to get a haircut. We don't listen to, musical instruments, music with instruments, and a few other items. So I get my haircut now while I could. The lines of the barbershop start to come up. So it's now a little cooler up there in the hair. So getting back, another interesting point with the Passover is that, as you know, those who um, did done biblical reading, that a lamb was brought into the homes of the Jewish people on the 10th of the month of Sivan. And the Passover um, actual holiday was going to start um, towards the end of the 14th day. And the official full-blown holiday starts on the 15th day after night. So the Jewish people brought in the lambs to their homes on the 10th. And why was this? Well, they're going to need the lambs for the Passover sacrifice offering, which was a command by God. And bringing them early would cause the Egyptians to question what's going on. Why do you have keeping a pet lamb in the house? So it's interesting to note that if you were involved with the text, that when the Jewish people came to Egypt initially, that it was pointed out that shepherds were abomination to the Egyptians. So how is that? So in short, one of the gods of Egypt, not just an idol, but was the lamb. They worshipped the lamb. So anybody who was involved with lambs, especially for agriculture and slaughter and human consumption, was not held in high regard. So here we have the lamb as a living god of the Egyptians and the Jewish people having in the house. And they say, "What are you going to do with this lamb? Why is it here?" They said, "In 4 days, we're going to sacrifice it to our God." Well, this didn't go well. And is, is a bit of a self sacrifice for the Jewish people, yet, but by this time, Moses was held in very high accord by most with the Egyptians. But nevertheless, to mess with their God required a little bit of a self sacrifice. And this is what they did to their credit. So this brings up another point that here we have that actually slaughtering an animal is negating the idol worship in paganism. So, contrary to most people want to do, and understandably so, is to think of an animal being slaughtered for a ritual. But here we see that that ritual um, negated a terrible belief in the belief system, the idol worshiper. And the idol worship had many customs or many rituals which are really hard to imagine. So this is kind of an interesting point with the pact with the calf, the lamb, and also it was the blood from the sacrifice of the lamb that was put on the doorpost. It had to be on the doorpost to save people from being approached by the angel of death. There's more to the story and details and variations, but essentially that, as you know, that God said, put the blood on the doorpost and protect it from the angel of death. So here, an animal was sacrificed, but for the well-being of the humans, which is the case with eating food as well. Here it comes in more of a spiritual plane, or but pretty close to physical as well, with the chance of the angel of death doing his job. So not everything that meets the eye or the customs we have or the mores um, are always applicable when it comes to God and His ways and what He wants. There's a time and place for everything, and so here with the animal being sacrificed or animal sacrifices in general, that if you're just reading it from the book or hearing about it in the story, you say, oh, what's going on here? So it brings you back to the time of the Great Temple, where there were many sacrifices, and but we can't look at it from what we see now, the picture in our eyes. There were, if you read in this book called Ethics of the Father, there are many miracles, open miracles that occurred in that great sanctuary in Jerusalem. And there's a different mindset about, an animal, being a substitute for a human being. I mean, unless you're a perfect, saint, it could be that you have done something which has not been discovered, or even has been discovered not to the extent, or the legal system is such that it's very liberal as far as um, people being innocent. But God still has His ways and has messengers, and forgiveness roots for forgiveness. So try to look at the whole picture instead of narrow views represented in the everyday life we find today. So here with the Passover sacrifice that, and back to the great temple, that you realize that there's no sacrifices that have been done for the Jewish people with the destruction of the great temple. Before there was places where people could make offerings, but once the temple was built, they said this is the only place where it could be such a thing. So many of the things were stopped with the destruction of the temple. And that includes the Sanhedrin, the great court, the great high court. And that great high court really was the only one that could sentence people to death um, if it was, deemed appropriate. And that in itself, as I alluded to before, is very difficult to convict someone with everything that's involved. There has to be witnesses. They have to be seen in a certain way, and there has to be warnings and frequent warnings, and the person has to be sure they understood the warning. So you get a little picture with this and some other laws that seem rough. That likelihood of their occurrence was rare, or if at all. But nevertheless, the for example, the Noahide, there's no official, in my understanding, there's no official confirmation of a person actually uh, getting being a card carrying Noahide without the base of Migdash. And as far as people looking at the maybe inequalities in the Noahide laws, as far as maybe severities and liberalness, in the laws, that remember these sentences can't be carried out anyway without the great Sanhedrin. So sometimes you have to take a look at the picture, create a picture, and say that it's not happening now. Now, what happens, and the question comes up now, what happens when Mashiach comes? We have the great revelation of God and the rebuilding of the temple, and back to that, you know, how to say, ideal state that occurred with the creation of the world. So with that in mind, you say, okay, well, that's going to be tough when those days come. But remember that, imagine the revelation of Mashiach, Messiah, and the things that will occur, the mindset that, you know, we're looking at things a different way, and most likelihood, and what would be something that's tempting to do now wouldn't be tempting to do then. When Rabbi asked this question to in this in this in this way, in this root of inequality, maybe he said, even now there are places and countries and cultures where theft is like out of the question. this is something we don't do. It's disgusting. And how much more so with the advent of coming of the Messiah. So once again, I ask you when you approached or you come up with a realization that hey, looks pretty tough or uh, inconsistent or doesn't make sense exactly, that in your in your mindset, in your perception, as I mentioned before, that reality, a lot of it is perception and background and experiences and learning and education and family. So step back, you count to 10, and give your mind a chance to examine the whole picture as much as possible. And again, continue with the learning and treating others as you want to be treated yourself. Going further with this, so we have the lamb and sacrifices and adjusting to the concept of sacrifices. That another point to make about the Pesach Seder, I was mentioning there's mitzvahs. And just a review, if you're at a Seder, you'll see a special plate. Um, in Chabad, you'll see probably just a piece of aluminum foil. Otherwise, you've probably seen in some of the kosher stores if you're in there, a Passover plate with you know beautiful artwork, and there's indentations or cups with various items, and you'll see there's going to be an egg that represents the holiday sacrifice that each holiday had. Each holiday had a certain sacrifice. So even though Passover had the Passover sacrifice, that this holiday sacrifice still existed. So we used the egg to represent that. And by the way, you'll say representation by an egg, and what we use for the representation of the Paschal lamb, the Passover sacrifice, we use a chicken neck, and we take a good bit of the meat off of it. And there's another situation where there's a sacrifice made, not regarding Passover, at another time, around the time of Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, where we use chickens, and chickens were never offered in the Great Temple, the Beis Hamikdash, we call it. The point of the matter is that if we don't have the Beis Hamikdash and we don't have the actual obligation hands-on, that we want to be sure there's no mistaken that something is actually, oh, I'm going to make the sacrifice with a chicken or an egg, and because I seldom do it at the Pesach. So that's kind of stretching it. Not likely anybody's going to make that uh, association. So we use things that are very distant from the actual thing itself that was done back in the days of the Great Temple. Going forward, you'll see a cup with called moror or bitter herbs, horseradish, and that is part of the Seder, and it's a reminder of the bitterness of slavery. There's another dish which chopped nuts, apples, maybe pears. Some people add wine. It's like a little bit of a paste, and we don't eat it initially there, but it's to remind us of the mortar, which was used for the bricks. The Jewish people had to make bricks in Egypt, and they needed mortar, and that was part of the whole process, things they had to make. So that paste of relish, fruit relish, we call it chorosis, is a reminder of that. And then there's more bitter herbs, which we use for the making of an item called korach. Korech. It's a sandwich because if you look at one of the passages, it says you should eat matzah and the Paschal offering and then bitter herbs. So one interpretation is like a sandwich. So we have these. So you can use even romaine lettuce. So that plate has that item, and there's a thing called karpas, what's it like, either a piece of onion or a potato. And it's something we dip in salt water, remind of our tears, the tears. So, and it's also to have the kids ask questions. Why are you doing this? And here, the salt water with the potato seems like really stretching it. And but we want the kids to ask questions, and that comes into another mitzvah for the Jews on Passover. He says you got to tell the bincha. You should teach it to your children. So again, the holiday is repeated. We have the opportunity to teach our children our heritage, our past, the experience of our forefathers, and anything related to that. So here's a chance for a father to make sure the father's home, not in business, not talking business, and of course something to be done every day to sit and learn with your son is a very important item, essential to that relationship with the father and the son, to be learning together and probing and discussing. And maybe the child says, that reminds me of another question I had. That opens the door for that relationship, a critical relationship. So to teach it to a child at the Passover service is not a casual sort of thing. And a matter of fact, interesting item which was introduced by the Lubavitcher Rebbe is that they described four sons at the Passover table, and each son has different levels of intelligence, commitment, experience, attitude. So they broke it into four sons, and one who wants to learn, one who doesn't want to learn, one who has difficulty learning, and one who's not yet old enough to ask questions. I have it down correctly, but the Rebbe said we need a fifth chair for a fifth son. God willing, you should have that many children and more, healthy and wise and pleasure to raise. And but there's a fifth son who, for whatever his reason, has chosen not to be or take part of the Passover celebration. So the Rebbe said we should have a chair for that fifth son to remember him and to hope that he'll come there and there's a place waiting for him. So unlike many dispositions that in Lubavitch that no one's lost and we don't give up hope and we do what we can to keep the door open for someone to return to the fold if it happens that they left. And so I don't know if you'll see the fifth chair at other places. It's not an obligation. It's a custom thing primarily set up at Lubavitcher Rebbe. So going forward a little more, that regarding forgiveness, this is not Yom Kippur or Rosh Hashanah where we're asking forgiveness. That's the main thing. The main thing is to remember freedom and our heritage. And so I say this to any parent in the world, and to remember that a heritage is really critical to a child. And I've been in neighborhoods where that it was a sports figure. That's all they had that they knew of. Or in that era, I go back a good while, and or somebody else in politics, whatever. But that community only had that heritage, so to speak. So it's a blessing to have a heritage of thousands of years and hundreds of experiences and challenges, and treasure that. And whatever you can do to present it to your child for his confidence and his self pride and dignity, keep that in mind. And even in Jewish communities, ancestors, the line of ancestors has been lost. There's a famous story where one great rabbi from a great lineage family family lineage had all sorts of documents tracing the lineage all the way back, and there was, I think, a fire or something of that sort, where all the papers became lost, and the family was upset and said, "How are we going to present our lineage, our background, our heritage?" So one son said, "Don't worry, it'll come from me." So each individual has the opportunity to be example to himself, his family, his community, and has the potential. And if there's no one else, then Hashem gave you that potential for you to uncover. And again, to retrace, to go back, whatever we're doing, whatever commanded, whatever the situations were, it's called B'dei Shemayim, all by the hand of Hashem. And it's up to us to use the Hashem as tools that Hashem gave us, our intellect, our emotions, which can be used in a positive way with control, and our communities, and we have the ability to succeed and do Hashem's will. And remember, you have that individual relationship with Hashem. So I hope this gives a little bit of overall insight. And remember, I'm not a rabbi and I'm not a doctor. So I'm just trying to blend the experiences that I've had in worldly fields and spiritual fields and bring them together and try to make uh, the experience of looking into Judaism at whatever level you choose to be a positive one and one that you feel confident with. Good night.